Welcome to the Orthodontic Pearls podcast, where we share tips and tricks to better your clinic, business, and life. Today, we have our honored guest, Dr. Corinne Devin, as we discuss how her service in the military has shaped her life and the life of her family through generations since the Revolutionary War. And now your hosts of the podcast, Drs. Chris Teeters, Brian Anderson, and Andy Sarpadar.
All right, welcome back to the podcast. Today we have a very special guest, Dr. Corinne Devin. And Corinne is an orthodontist for the United States Navy. That's a very unique position. How are you doing today, Corinne?
I'm doing wonderful and happy to be here in beautiful Arizona.
Well, thanks for visiting. Corinne was at my office today and we had a good time. You know, she taught me a lot about what I was doing wrong with patients, you know, and that sort of thing. So, you know, I feel like I became a better orthodontist from her.
Which is a lot.
Yeah, by the end of it, I was just like, you know what? You just see my patients for me. You obviously know more than I do. Let's just, you know, I went and cried in the corner. Nah, of course I'm kidding. But with us today, we have Dr. Chris Teeters and Dr. Brian Anderson. Say hello, guys.
Happy to be here. Hey, Andy.
Good to be here again.
Corinne, we would love to hear a little bit about your background. Now, you and I spoke a couple of months ago for an interview we did for the PCSO Bulletin, and you know, you were generous enough to share a lot of your experience. I found that very fascinating, but maybe just sum up your background in a few sentences for us, if you could.
Absolutely, and thank you for having me. I was born and raised in the military and drank the Kool-Aid, so the United States Navy paid for me to go to UNLV Dental School. Graduated, did 3 years as a general dentist, and while deployed in Iraq, got picked up for residency and been an orthodontist ever since. So I've had the pleasure of serving our active duty and families in Italy, Japan, and California, and it's great to be home stateside. So could not be happier to be here, and I dabble into public speaking as well as competing pageants because it definitely keeps me in my A game with no matter what the military throws my way.
Very cool. And that's impressive too. So with everything that you have going on, you're a beauty pageant winner. I think you just got Miss California. Did I see that right?
I actually just passed over the title. So there is a new queen that has been crowned. So I have been dethroned officially.
Oh, well, Chris, you were in a beauty pageant recently too, weren't you, Chris?
I don't know if I call it a beauty pageant, but I guess one of those bodybuilding type things was really
is that what they're calling
an interesting experience.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, today we want to jump right in and discuss a post on the forum that got a lot of attention recently. And this one comes to us from Larry Levin. And he says that he's putting together a list of analogies that orthodontists use to explain difficult concepts to their patients. For example, he uses a coffee cup and a coffee lid analogy to explain a tooth-size discrepancy. So obviously, if the lid is too small for the cup, it's not going to go on. And we use that to describe a Bolton discrepancy. So he's looking for a list that he can provide for his SLU residents. And this got a lot of comments, and we wanted to poll our group here and see if there's any good analogies that we have that we might want to share with the group. I'm going to kick this over to Brian because I know that you've got a lot of analogies. You're like the analogy king, aren't you?
I know. My TC just says, we got to be quick on this one. Just no analogies this time. I'm like, I feel like I'm fighting with my hands tied behind my back. One of my favorites over the last few years is explaining like a deep overbite. And I'll relate my experience. I'll say something like, when I was a kid, I had some bite issues and I had to wear rubber bands. And I remember after my teeth got straight, I didn't know why I was still wearing the rubber bands. And they bugged me so much because my bite, didn't hurt and I could function fine. I was capable of eating food just fine. But a malocclusion, a bad bite is kind of like in medicine, high blood pressure, hypertension, they call it the silent killer. Silent because there are no symptoms and you can generally function fine. But as we know with high blood pressure, it's chronically destructive. So over a period of time, it can be very damaging. And, it's similar with your bite. Generally asymptomatic. It's not going to be painful for you. And generally you can chew fine. Like I wasn't like emaciated as a teenager, like, I can't chew. I have to get my bite fixed. So, right. But it needs to be addressed because it's going to be chronically destructive. So that's one of my recent kind of more popular ones in helping them understand the why of rubber bands and getting them on board with that, or the why of treatment. Well, my teeth are pretty straight. Why do I need treatment? Well, your teeth are pretty straight and your overbite's severe, right? So
what about you, Chris? What do you use in your practice?
I think the biggest thing for me is you don't want to ever freak the patient out. So, and I never say the term power chain because people don't think of it as a connecting chain. I just say PC. So whenever I am talking about or to a technician about what we're going to do, I would say something like PC 6 to 6, but not actually using the word power chain. And when talking to the patient about doing IPR, I always use the term polish instead of stripping, because stripping freaks them out. And it's also, I think, important to have codes, especially let's say if an assistant does something wrong. I say LTA, which means let's talk after. You never want to say, what are you doing?
And I like that one.
And them communicating back to me, if it's their first time doing something, they say CYD, which means can you demonstrate, rather than, oh, doc, this is my first time. I've never done this before. And the patient's freaking out. Like, why am I your guinea pig, right? So just say CYD, can I get a CYD on this forceps? It's a lot better than, hey, can you show me?
That's great.
That reminds me, when we have new assistants, one of the most common issues I see is that they're putting the brackets on upside down. When they're when they bond, or it's just like a couple brackets, and every now and then even a seasoned assistant will get that wrong, and I tell them, look, when something like that happens, I'm just going to correct it. I'm going to look at you. I'm going to get your attention, and I'm just going to correct it. I want you to look at what I'm doing, but I'm not going to draw attention to this because I don't want this to freak the patient out. We're going to fix it. It'll be fine, and I want them to maintain faith in you. But I almost inevitably every single time I'll have that conversation. I'll look at them in the eye. I'll flip it upside down. We're almost to the home stretch, and they say, "Oh, I put it upside down, didn't I?" I'm like, yeah. All right, you did. Now I gotta spend 15 minutes explaining to the patient why I have someone doing this. And anyway, you need some cooperation with something like that too. But I really like those code words for things that you need to address, but not right in front of the patient. So now, Corinne, you're in a completely different situation. Now, as I understand it, you work with, I think, at times only one other assistant. So you're a lot more hands-on. In your kind of environment, what sort of euphemisms, we'll call it, or analogies will you use to explain difficult concepts?
So one of the difficult concepts that comes to me is patients don't understand that orthodontics, we're very holistic. We're like a quarterback on the football team. And I say that because with me, very often my cases, I am working with oral surgeons. I'm working with prosthodontists, periodontists. And so one thing that I usually try to do is I always do a full mouth periodontal screening on all my adult patients, because that's predominantly what I treat. And as good as we are trying to catch things in the military, people move, people deploy, things change in a split second. So I always do a full mouth probing on all my patients, transfers, new, whoever it is. And I always explain to them, I say, we use heavy forces, which is something they can definitely comprehend, especially in the military, but also that, doing orthodontics is we need a good foundation. And periodontal disease is a silent killer. And I really start that out with the good oral hygiene, especially if they get sent somewhere for 2 months and I can't see them. And I always tell them it's like having a good home to come to. In military, we always think about when can we get home? What does home feel like? What does it look like? And I kind of equate that to the health of their mouth, the periodontal being a good foundation, a good home to come to. Because let's be honest, we have to be very transformational, our leadership in the military, and we also have to make things understood across many branches. So I can't use that alphabet soup, that CYD, the LTA, because we have alphabetic soup in the military. So I love that. So I try to think of things that resonate with people, no matter if they're a E1 bottom coming into the military or they're an admiral or a general. That seems to resonate most with people.
That's interesting, because these analogies are going to be a function of the culture of both the doctor and the patients that they're treating. I was thinking, as Chris was talking about that power chain, that was a foreign concept to me. I have patients asking me for the power chain. I think maybe I have more TikTokers or something, but that's something that they want to do. They're showing me videos of their TikTok influencers changing their own power chains. They ask me, when can I get my power chain on? So I don't have a euphemism for that, because when I say power chain, their eyes light up. And everyone knows exactly what that is. They don't necessarily connect that it's for space closure and not just because it looks cool, but they're not afraid of it. So I'll say, one of my favorite recent ones, I feel like we need a lot of analogies for IPR, because you say that the wrong way, and that can be one of the scariest concepts for such a simple routine thing that everyone does. I've used the polish. I usually say that we're going to polish your contacts a little bit. And then I always get the dad who comes out and says, "You mean you're going to file my kid's teeth?" I'm like, yeah, that's basically what it is, And again, context is important. If it's this dad who's wearing, a Carhartt shirt and is obvious, he's like a gruff guy, doesn't really care. I'm like, yeah, it's filing. He's like, yeah, just don't BS me. Just tell me what it is. I don't care. Another layer that I've thrown on top of that, which is easier to visualize for patients, is I'll say, look at all the crowding you have, say on the lower arch. Do you see how triangular your teeth are? You notice how they're so much wider up at the top, and then they narrow down. So that's part of the reason why they're crowded, is because they can't line up together. What I want to do is, if I can reshape them ever so slightly to make them more rectangular like bricks, they're going to stack together like bricks. It's going to be more stable. It's going to help the alignment. And that's something that has worked a lot in my practice, and even gets over that patient who's not buying your euphemism. Like, you call it what it is, doc, you're grinding my kid's teeth down. It's like, well, yes, but there's a purpose to that. So that's something that's worked a little bit in my practice. Going through the comments here, there's some of these that got a little more attention than others. Zach Williams, for example, he talks about broken brackets. He says that he tells people that when a bracket is initially broken, it's like when a car hits your windshield. It doesn't crack right away, but it will in time. When you bite something hard, it's like the crack in the windshield and the bond cracks. Then over the next few days with chewing, the wires are moving, crack grows until it eventually completely comes loose, often on something soft that you might unknowingly blame, but it started hours or days before. I really like that one too, because when we see broken brackets, it's always, hey, it fell off while I was eating soup, or I was sitting there watching TV, or I was asleep, and that's when the bracket broke. And one of the things I challenge them on again is, did you hear a pop? And they'll usually say no. I'm like, well, if it broke, then you would hear a pop. And I know it didn't break when they're just sitting there. But I like this as an added little analogy there. I thought that was very, very clever.
If you're an orthodontist that wants to connect with over 500 colleagues, hear over 30 of the best speakers in orthodontics, and see 50 of the most cutting-edge exhibits, have a chance to win some of over $70,000 worth of prizes, including a trip to Kauai, and enjoy the absolute best parties in orthodontics, you won't want to miss the 7th annual MOPC, the Mother of Pearls Conference, coming this October 9th through 11th. We're going big for our 7th year by renting out the Astronaut Memorial Foundation at the Kennedy Space Center in Cape Canaveral, Florida. This is the hub for NASA, where they train more astronauts than anywhere else in the world, and SpaceX launches occur all the time. We toured the campus, and let me tell you, it's like the Disney World of space, with theme park attractions, actual space shuttles, interactive exhibits, and real astronauts. On top of the best speakers, we'll be having our world-famous Friday Night Pearls party under the Saturn Apollo 5 rocket, with dinner, drinks, space-themed activities, and live music from the world's only all-orthodontist band, Relapse. Early bird prices are about to go up for every 100 tickets sold and have already gone up twice. Be sure to register today with your team at orthodonticpearls.org to get the best price for the best conference in orthodontics. Plus, we are the only conference with worry-free registration. If anything comes up and you can't make it for any reason, you can transfer your registration to next year's conference absolutely free. It's a no-brainer. So be sure to lock in your best price by registering you and your team for the best conference in orthodontics, the Mother of Pearls Conference, at orthodonticpearls.org today.
Corinne and Andy, one of the things that has given me more purpose recently, I would say has energized me more recently, has been to try to bring things into orthodontics in the way we communicate with our patients that transcend orthodontics and apply to real life. Like, for example, when I'm talking to kids about wearing rubber bands, I'll say something like, okay, you're not going to be perfect at this. There are going to be days that you fail, you don't do well, but you want to be consistent. You want to be consistent, and you want to be consistently hitting your goal. So on average, you want to be in that zone that you feel good about, that you feel proud about, that's consistently close to the goal. But you're not going to be perfect, and life's not about being perfect. Nothing in our experience as human beings is perfect. And so the key is, when you're not perfect, to get back up and to get back on track, and to not go into this shame spiral where you just think, oh gosh, well, I didn't hit my goal, and now I don't even want to try, because we kind of tend to be perfectionists a little bit, but that's not what life's about. Life is about failing, getting back up, dusting yourself off, and recommitting. And you know what? When you do it that way, even if you don't hit your goal exactly, you're going to be way further ahead than you would have been if you didn't even have the goal in the first place. So it's a healthier way to look at it. So I like to try and, bring things in like that. And, for example, after getting braces on, I'll say something like, congratulations on getting started. This is a journey, not unlike real life. There's going to be ups and downs. There are going to be exciting times when you're really thrilled about how your teeth are looking and you're seeing progress. There are going to be times where it's just frustrating. And most of the time, it's just going to be tolerable. Most of the time, it's just going to be just neither good nor bad and just tolerable. Knowing that, you're going to be prepared for the ups and downs. You're going to be prepared for the little bumps here and there, and just have faith that in the end, this is going to be worth it, and it's going to provide a meaningful transformation. I mean, things like that, I'm just trying to bring real life into it, or help them to relate to real life through orthodontics.
Yeah, I think that's awesome.
Great.
Well, to just finish up this talk about analogies and all that, there's one other that I'm a little bit proud of, and that also has to do with broken brackets. And I'm a big believer. The fundamental aspect of customer service is exceeding expectations, right? So in order to exceed expectations, you have to be conscientious about setting those expectations up front. So I always say keep your expectations low and then no one will be disappointed. No, I'm just kidding. What I say is at that consult, I explain that we use a very temporary glue to bond the brackets on. And I often ask if anyone has been skiing before. And this will probably work a little bit better in your area, Brian, not so much in Arizona. You'd be surprised how many people respond, actually, no, I've never been skiing. I'm like, well, all right, I don't have anything for you. I say, well, the first thing they do when they measure you for a ski boot is they're going to dial in the amount of pressure that it takes for that ski to fall off. Why do you think they do that? Because it's a pain in the butt to go chasing your ski down the mountain when it falls. Why would they dial in that pressure? Well, the reason is because if you fall the wrong way and that ski doesn't fall off, it's taking your entire knee, ankle, leg. It's going to just shred all the tendons in your knee as that knee twists around. So as a safety precaution, that ski is designed to fall off with the right amount of pressure. And that's the same thing we need to do for your bonding, because at some point we need to take these off of your teeth without you fracturing every tooth in your mouth. If you eat the wrong thing, this thing is going to come off by design so that your tooth doesn't chip. And when I explain it that way, they really get it. And the fact of the matter is that is completely true. We could use crown cement to put these braces on, and that would not break off. But that's also the problem. It will not break off. So that's to get in front of that question that I always get, which is, well, why are you guys using cheap glue? Why don't you just use something that'll never break? And that's the reason, is because your tooth is going with it. So that's something that has worked pretty well for me. Why don't we move on now? And I want to do a deep dive into Corinne's background here, because Corinne, we got to know each other for a PCSO Bulletin article a couple of months ago. And, I was just fascinated by your backstory. You've had quite a life. I mean, we mentioned the orthodontics, the beauty pageant, the military, Navy service. Let's get a deep dive into your background, your family background, how you got into the Navy in the first place. That's an unusual career to stick with as an orthodontist. And then how that segued into your ability to go into, beauty pageants and live your lifestyle the way you like. We'd love to hear about your perspective on these things.
Well, if you told my 8-year-old self that I would follow my father into a career and become a dentist and then go and deploy to the same place he was deploying to, which was Operation Desert Storm, I would tell you that you're crazy. But somehow I drank the Kool-Aid. My family goes back to the Revolutionary War. And so somehow we all get the bug to serve. And I'm really actually excited. In about 4 months, I actually will put on the rank of Captain 06 or Colonel, because I know we are near an Air Force base, and I'll be the first female in my family to do it. So I'm really, really excited that. And y'all inspired me from the Orthodontic Girls Conference on the Midway to do my promotion ceremony on the USS Midway.
Nice.
But I digress. Awesome. I digress. So how did I join? Dental school is really expensive. Never thought I wanted to be a dentist, but I always loved working with my dad. And yes, it's insanely expensive. I am shocked that most of our colleagues are graduating anywhere from $500,000 to, I'm hearing, up to $1 million of debt. And when I was going to college, I was a college cheerleader, which, by the way, I love that you support a lot of cheerleaders. Dr. Zarpator, I admired that in your office today, all the cheer teams I saw on the wall. But I did my prereqs and got into 2 dental schools, and the Navy had a wonderful scholarship. It's called the HPSP. And if anyone out there has kids or knows someone that wants to do it, please feel free to reach out to me. I've been on the interview side. I've been on the board side. The Army and Air Force offers this, and they pay 100%. It doesn't matter how expensive that dental school is. They pay it and they give you a stipend. Now, how far that stipend goes, depending on the part of country you're living in, I'll let you be the judge of that.
You're in California. I doubt it goes very far out there.
No, I did my undergrad in St. Mary's, but I did my dental school training at UNLV. So
Oh, okay.
go Running Rebels. And then, I came in and I actually thought I wanted to be a pediatric dentist. And it was actually the oral surgeons who lured me into orthodontics. Never had braces. And I have to say, I fell in love with the dark side of orthodontics. 'Cause we do a lot of
The
surgery. We
dark
do a
side
lot
of
of full mouth
ortho.
the dark side of ortho, yes. The surgical side, the full mouth rehab, where the patients literally catch a bullet to their mouth, saves their life. And guess what? We got to go in there and move some things around and make things right. And that's where
Wow.
we, as orthodontists, are the ultimate chess players, you know? So
Yeah. A lot of strategy
it's
involved with
great.
that.
A lot of strategy, but yeah, how it works for the military is very rarely do you go straight into a specialty like orthodontics or pediatrics. There's only 14 of us in the entire world in the US Navy. In fact, the PCOS Bulletin did a beautiful job featuring my colleagues.
Of
And
course.
before I continue, these are my views, not the views of the Department of Defense. But I just loved as an orthodontist in the military that you get to touch so many lives. You get to say yes to a group of men and women who unselfishly sacrifice themselves for the freedoms I enjoy. And I get to work with the prosthodontist, the periodontist, the oral surgeon, the pediatric dentist, and, give them something that they do so they catch my bullets for me. And when I was deployed in Iraq with the Marines for Operation Iraqi Freedom, it was actually when I applied for residency. So you can imagine what my interviews would be like in Iraq on the phone interviewing. But I got into the military's orthodontic residency program in Texas and graduated. And then from there, we have half of our positions, they're called billets, overseas and half of them stateside. So overseas, we're in Italy, Spain, and Japan. And I'm only speaking for the Navy, but the Army and the Air Force does have places around the world as well. And they're a little bit bigger, but not much. And then the US, we're in California, Texas, North Carolina, and Virginia. And since I've been in, I've done most of my time overseas. So I was in Yokosuka, Japan, outside of Tokyo, and I worked 2 practices. I managed it there, which then I worked in another practice where I would fly on a Japanese airline down to Nagasaki and worked in a small satellite office. And I did that every 6 weeks. In fact, I think the flight attendants called me Lady Gaga because I came in singing Bad Romance with my AirPods, not realizing.
I was wondering where you're going to go with that. Was it because you wore a meat dress on the airplane?
No, blonde hair. I'm a flashlight in that country. And at 5'3", I'm tall, which I so miss, as well as the sushi. And learned a lot. Picked up some Japanese, so I speak Scotia, so just enough. And then came back to the States. And in true military fashion, I got a 2-week notice to leave the country because we had a colleague who left Italy. And I went, and it was incredible. Was there for 3 years. Overseas is where we get to treat the kiddos. We get to treat everyone. Of course, we're limited by supplies, staff, and just the size of the base where we're at. And then from Italy, I was there during the pandemic, came to Japan. And I was in Iwakuni with the Marines. I was the second orthodontist they've ever had permanently there. That Iwakuni is near Hiroshima. So just to give your listeners an idea of Japan is imagine the size of California, but with a third of the population of the US.
Oh,
wow.
So even denser than California.
Denser than California. So just to put things in perspective, because Japan is made of 4 major islands. Honshu is the largest one with Tokyo, Kyoto, Hiroshima. I was near it in Iwakuni. And they have a bunch of small collected islands, Okinawa being another island and it's about 3 hours south of Tokyo, where we also have a very large military footprint. And what made me join, what is continuing to join me is I've had a couple stages in my life where I thought I was going to get out. And then I had some things that happened to me and my family where I thought, you know what? When else in my life am I going to be able to live in Europe? When else in my life am I going to be able to live in a country that people vacation to? That I have colleagues like Glenn Krieger who calls me up and says, give me your best 2-week itinerary for Japan that I can just fly to.
I'm going to have to get that
backyard.
itinerary. We want to go to Japan one of these days.
I'm happy to be, if that, and then with pageantry, that came as a complete dare from some jerk in my dental school who told me I couldn't do it. So of course I had to prove him wrong.
Really?
And he's an orthodontist too now, which is funny. And he loves
Was that Brian Anderson? I think you went to UNLV, didn't you?
He did, but we didn't overlap. It wasn't him. No. I would have remembered.
I went to Iowa.
Yeah.
You know what? I'd like to throw this out there. Brian, I dare you to join a beauty pageant. What do you think about that?
It's never going to happen.
No, all right.
There is a Mr. Beauties of America. I could lure you in. So if you ever change your mind.
No, it's never going to happen. But, Corinne, I wanted to just say, one thing I've been impressed with, listening to you and just in general over, the years is when I hear somebody who serves our country, I'm impressed with their dedication and generally their willingness, and I would even say proud willingness or gratitude. They serve their country with gratitude, and I just think that's amazing. And of course, I'm sitting here thinking, Andy and I, we're guys that we just enjoy the freedoms that America offers, and unless we put ourselves in the shoes of somebody who's serving. I mean, you mentioned somebody taking a bullet, and you feel some sense of like, I love being able to serve you because you served me, right? I just think that's a really beautiful thing, honestly. And I've always admired that about people who will serve in anybody or anything when it's a higher purpose, right? When they feel committed that they're higher principles that are worth defending, right? I think that's just a great thing. So I loved hearing that from you. And I just want to ask you about one thing I've grown to appreciate the older I've gotten is to have pride in whatever you belong to, right? Pride in your country, or pride in your family, or pride in your profession, but a healthy pride. And I would say that would be where you feel grateful for it, you are appreciative of it, you love it, and you can also be self-critical, that you aren't necessarily, can only see it from your point of view, but you can see it from another point of view. In your service, did you find that you were able to appreciate, I mean, you mentioned about other cultures. Did you find that balance, I guess? I don't know. I don't know the right way to say that. Just, I'm trying to dive into this concept. I think it's fascinating.
So what I'm hearing is that you want to know really what it's like to practice in other countries, and kind of what I gathered with working with orthodontists in Japan or in Italy, just to make sure that I'm understanding your question.
Yeah. So being a proud American, it sounds like you're a proud American, right? Being
yes, I run a patriotism caffeine.
Yeah. Being a proud American, did you find it interesting to be in these other cultures where you could even say, gosh, there's something about the Japanese culture I actually like more than America. I still love America. It doesn't diminish America in my eyes, but where you can be self-critical and still appreciate. Because I think too often we're dualistic minded, meaning we think we either have to love America and be 100% patriots, right? Where we can't ever be critical. We have to pretend that everything's great here. Or we find out the flaws of our country, or like I said, religion or whatever it is, and we just have to just completely distance ourselves, throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? I think so often we're so dualistic that if we come to the middle, it's just such a gratifying place to be, to say, hey, I am patriotic. I love my country. And you know what? We've got some mess to clean up on our end too. We got some things to do. Did you feel that, or did you find that being in different cultures?
100%. There's things from Japan I wish I could bring back here, things, and also things from Italy. So with Japan being my recent overseas tour, it is such a safe country, and you don't see homeless people. They believe in actually bringing their homeless people into certain areas and having places where they can have routinely fed, take care of their needs. So coming back to California, where I see quite a few, that's definitely a culture change for me, especially having the mayor of San Diego down the street from me. I would definitely say I loved how everything is organic in Japan. Like the food, the fish, they don't put all these extra things on their sushi. And the other thing that I really enjoyed in the culture is they're fully about being present. You don't ever see anyone, their phones out on their table. They're very quiet. They're quiet and very respectful. So, for example, on an airplane, no one would have their elbow over on the side of your seat outside of theirs. People, you would be at restaurants, and if you're talking too loud, someone would look at you and ask you if you could lower the voice so they could still hold the conversation at the table. They're very much of a group mentality, and I really do appreciate that. When you're living in Japan, you come back to the States, you almost feel like you're like, why is everyone screaming? Why is it so loud? It's something I really appreciate. And there's other little small things, but those are probably the big things that I do love. Driving on the other side of the road was challenging, not gonna lie. And I would say the last thing, they're geniuses with space. I had a car that looked like a Flintstone car, but that could fit as much as my 330i. I don't know how.
Wow.
But
efficient, just efficient.
Efficient. I know. I miss that. I miss all those things. With Italy, the thing that I miss obviously is the food. I never knew tomatoes and lettuce could ever taste that way. There is no such thing as Italian dressing in Italy, by the way. That's an American thing, or Alfredo. But
What I love about the Italian cultures is they would rather sacrifice money for time with their family. That is something I learned hands through working with. They're all about va bene. Va bene means we live here in the moment. We enjoy each other. Whether it's a big lunch or a big dinner, they would always say, I'd rather have more time to be with my family and go on buon viaggio, which means have a great vacation, than make more money. And so there was something about that Italian lifestyle that slows down and it forces you to really think about being present and what's most important, which is the people that you surround and love.
You know, what's fascinating about that to me is that it's almost like you were stationed in two polar opposites.
Yes.
That, I mean, Japan, what is the word they have? They have literally a word for death by overwork, right? What is the name of that? Does anyone know what that's called? I'm going to have to look that up. And then on the other hand, you have Italy, which it's more of an elderly population. In fact, I believe Japan's more of an elderly population at this point too. Their replacement rate is like dangerously low, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, that's neither here nor there, but what a perspective that you have. So, you talk about this dualistic thinking. You've got, United States for all of its flaws. I mean, I wouldn't want to live anywhere else. Obviously, you're a patriot, but you have you can still appreciate the beauty in another country. Personally, I really envy the Italian way of life a lot more than I do the Japanese. It's fun to visit Japan. They got this cool technology and rotating sushi and everything's so clean and efficient, like you guys are identifying. But I don't think work-life balance even exists over there. I've heard that like most of the men, like they're like tragically single. And I think that what I mean by that is they have relationships with devices or, AIs or, these dolls that you hear about. There's no real room for that family like there is in Italy. Did you pick up on that differential between the two? Did that ever enter your mind?
Oh, 100%. I would tell you everything that I loved in Italy, I disliked in Japan, and everything that I liked in Japan, I did not like in Italy. And what blew my mind away, we don't have this here in the US, but this is one thing I wish we have. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Shinkansen, if any of your audience is familiar. So the Shinkansen is a high-speed bullet train. It is the fastest train in the world. It is one way to get from one point in Japan to another. And the seats almost feel like you're in the extra row of the airline. That's the best way I can describe it. And you see the world passing you by. I highly recommend everyone to try it. But what blew my mind away is what you just said. I would see business people who would take the Shinkansen and travel from one half of Japan to another. That was their commute. That was like their daily commute. And I was thinking like, oh my gosh, if I had to do this every day, that's all this time away from my family, time away from my personal life. There is no balance. They believe in 12-hour work days. So it was very, very eye-opening to see, yes, a population that's very hardworking, very disciplined, very dedicated, but also they have other issues without going into kind of a gloom and doom because of that lifestyle, the pressure. And I saw that in my orthodontic practice with the kids because I did treat, instead of saying open please, it would be akade kudasai. And seeing some of that transcend to the kids and having to let them know, especially with the perfectionist mentality, or seeing their oral hygiene change when it was testing season, because a lot of the kids went out in town to Japanese schools. So at a very young age, their future was determined. So that was something that was just, I mean, it sounds like something out of like the Hunger Games, but it's very eye-opening.
I find it so interesting that there are always polar opposites that go together, right? For every positive, there's like a negative. For every like awesome trait, like for every light thing, there's a dark thing, right? And we're the same way in America, right? And as individuals too, like our greatest strengths, well, there's a cost to that. There's going to be a deficiency in some other area, right? Because we're good in this area, we're going to be deficient in this area. And so I think an interesting challenge that ultimately is really rewarding is when we can appreciate the good about something, a culture in this case, and also recognize the bad, and they don't cancel each other out. We don't think, well, the whole thing's bad, or, oh no, the whole thing's good. And well, we turn a blind eye to the thing that's bad, and so that's one thought. Another thought I had is, it's interesting how we can see cultures take shape based on what they value, right? What they value, what makes each individual in that culture valuable. And so these roles form, and you mentioned this perfectionist mentality, right? That like, if that's what's important, that you got to be kind of perfect, then you're going to work long hours and you're going to want to succeed at all costs. And there's going to be heavy pressure. So there's always like it's a double-edged sword,
If you're an orthodontist that wants to connect with over 500 colleagues, hear over 30 of the best speakers in orthodontics, and see 50 of the most cutting-edge exhibits, have a chance to win some of over $70,000 worth of prizes, including a trip to Kauai, and enjoy the absolute best parties in orthodontics, you won't want to miss the 7th annual MOPC, the Mother of Pearls Conference, coming this October 9th through 11th. We're going big for our 7th year by renting out the Astronaut Memorial Foundation at the Kennedy Space Center in Cape Canaveral, Florida. This is the hub for NASA, where they train more astronauts than anywhere else in the world, and SpaceX launches occur all the time. We toured the campus, and let me tell you, it's like the Disney World of space, with theme park attractions, actual space shuttles, interactive exhibits, and real astronauts. On top of the best speakers, we'll be having our world-famous Friday Night Pearls party under the Saturn Apollo 5 rocket, with dinner, drinks, space-themed activities, and live music from the world's only all-orthodontist band, Relapse. Early bird prices are about to go up for every 100 tickets sold and have already gone up twice. Be sure to register today with your team at orthodonticpearls.org to get the best price for the best conference in orthodontics. Plus, we are the only conference with worry-free registration. If anything comes up and you can't make it for any reason, you can transfer your registration to next year's conference absolutely free. It's a no-brainer. So be sure to lock in your best price by registering you and your team for the best conference in orthodontics, the Mother of Pearls Conference, at orthodonticpearls.org today.
Well, that's an interesting point that you bring up, because I think that depending on your lived experience, you're either going to overvalue or undervalue the influence of culture on who we become, success, however you define that. I mean, I think about your story, Corinne. So, you mentioned to me that your ancestry goes all the way back to the Revolutionary War. I mean, how many people can claim that? And also, how many people can claim to be an orthodontist who's also soon to be captain of the U.S. Navy? It's like you arrived in a very unique niche, and I think by your own admission, you even said that it surprised you that it happened, that you followed your father's footsteps. But in a sense, it wasn't inevitable, but it certainly influenced you, if for no better reason than it provided opportunities that others weren't able to take advantage of. I mean, you mentioned, what was the scholarship that you originally got? It was like the Daughters of the American Revolution or something like that.
That's what I got for college. And that's the only reason we knew we served all the way back to the Revolutionary War. But the scholarship I got for dental school was the Health Professions Scholarship Program.
Right.
And thought I was going to do my 4 years and get out. And, things just kept changing. And I think that's kind of the beauty of life, is like, you never know what's going to be thrown at you. And I can't say the years of Navy did not come without a lot of self-awareness, a lot of reflection, and a lot of introspective thought. One of the reasons I love being able to see other orthodontists like you and going to conferences outside the military is it gives me an appreciation of what is there out there to explore and do. So often in the military, we have to write the book as we read it. And in some ways, I feel like that's the case for both of you in private practice, where you have to find ways to lead and pivot, and sometimes that means doing things that you've never done. And sometimes that can really churn into a blessing. And sometimes you have to say, you know what, if I'm persistent, I'll get it. But if I'm consistent, I know I will keep it. And that is something that I think is really, really important. And that's something that I've learned to live my life, is like, if I mess up, or as we were talking earlier today, Andy, about cases, I love it when people come to me and say, hey, I'm really confused about this, or how can we go and do this? I feel like, hey, let's talk. I would love to hear your thought process, because to me, that's the beauty of our profession. We're colleagues over competition, and we all took the same Hippocratic oath to take care of our patients. And for me, in uniform, that may be, I have to treat every visit like that could be my last with them, because something could change.
It's interesting how your circumstances are definitely going to dictate your treatment style. I think we picked up a little bit on that talking today. And that does come down to people you surround yourself with. Some of that is by choice. Some of that is not by choice. You can't help the family you were born into, the culture you were born into, the country you were born into. For me, at least, the key to all of this is developing a level of humility, that we're not just the product of our own will. That is an important element. Again, like Brian was saying, it's not like we're going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. That doesn't mean that you're doomed to your circumstances forever. I think that it's best summed up. Here's another analogy. When I was studying genetics, we all did the Mendelian genetics with the P's and the different heights, and mix the X and Y, all that stuff. What was interesting to me was that if you water a plant and give it ideal nutrients, it will grow taller than if you don't. But A shrub is never going to grow as tall as a redwood, no matter how much nutrients you get, or no matter how poorly you take care of the redwood. The redwood might die, but it's never going to be a stubby little shrub. You see that with genetics, with your circumstances, whatever you want to call that. And I think of this like we're all born with certain circumstances outside of our control. And that is going to dictate a range within which we will perform. Okay. The truth of the matter is, I'll use myself as an example. I use this all the time. It's an easy one. No matter what I do, I'm not going to be tall enough to be like a decent basketball player. If I'm tall enough, yeah, I know there's some outliers who are about my height, but I don't have the mitochondria to do it, and even if I trained, I'm never going to, you get where I'm going with this. That's not where I should put my energy. I think that part of this is acknowledging the advantages that we have, and everyone has different advantages, different disadvantages, and optimizing for where you want to go based on where your potential is. What do you guys think about that? Am I being too myopic in this? Are you one of those Brian's giving me a look here. I feel like Brian's going to give me the Tony Robbins. We all have the same 24 hours in the day, and we can, if you wanted to be a basketball player, you wanted to be 7 feet tall, Andy, you could do it. So, counter my argument there, Brian. Poke holes in it. Tell me what's going on.
You know what? I actually, the older I've gotten, the more I see it that way. The less idealistic I tend to see things, and the more I'm trying to align myself with what's actually real, right? I'm trying to figure out what's actually real. And I think, the way that I see things is we are all each called to play our best role, our best role. Like on a basketball team, each player has a role, right? Even the bench player has a role.
That's what my coach always used to tell me.
Right? No, but for real, but everyone has a role, and not everyone can be the same position. And so what we're called to do is find out what our role is and do that role to the very best of our ability, and not to compare ourselves to a different role, because guess what? That's literally not our role. And if it is our role, then it will become our role as we play out our life story, right? As we focus on, doing what Corinne had said is, being curious and wanting to be better and viewing, other orthodontists as colleagues. There's this desire to be your best self and not measure yourself next to somebody else, whether you're success or failure if you achieve what they achieve. No, you're a success if you achieve what you can achieve when you're working and you're synced up with yourself and you're doing the best you can do, right?
Yeah.
And you're holding yourself accountable and you're honest, because sometimes we're dishonest with ourselves and we say, oh, I did that. No, sometimes we're not accountable, and you got to say, you know what?
Yep.
I could have done better, and I dropped the ball, right? So I think there's, I agree with you. I think that
there's so many ways, so many different directions we can go with that, and it comes down to that humility. So when you do find your power, when you do find your strength and find something you're good at, I think that there's also a level of humility that is warranted, that it wasn't all me. That's the truth. I didn't do this all by my bootstraps. The circumstances I was born into make a difference. The opportunities that were presented to me make a difference. Now I deserve some credit because I took advantage of those opportunities and I did work hard. But let's not let it go to our head and think, oh, I'm the best. And I find that's where you start to fail, is when you start to get that hubris, that ego. You think it's all me, then you start to feel invincible, and that's right. That comes right before the fall. So for that reason, humility. But then also, if you're on the other side of that, if you're down, if things are not as good as you think, cut yourself a little bit of slack, because you know what, some of that is just out of your control. The question you really have to ask is, did you do your best? And if you can answer that honestly, no matter where you're at, I think you can sleep well at night. Maybe I'm naive, but that's my perspective.
No, and Andy, it reminds me of something that Corinne said. If you're consistent, you'll get it.
Yeah.
So even if you do have an unlucky stroke, right? Mm-hmm. If you're consistent, then eventually things are going to kind of play out, and it may not be exactly what you thought it was going to play out, but it's going to play out to a place that you can accept it and be actually grateful for it. I think that gratitude is key as well. Yeah. Speaking of gratitude, I did want to say, thanks to Corinne for the service, and I appreciate it. And I recognize that we benefit every day from the service that people are, willingly give to our country. And thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's an honor to be here. And Right back to you guys. I'm always appreciative and grateful when I've been able to I made one orthodontic pearls. I think it was your second one in Newport Beach when I was actually in Italy. And then I didn't know exactly when I was going to land back here in San Diego from Japan, and reached out to Chris before he had to leave her call, and thank him for just connecting me and say, yeah, of course you can come, because I needed CE, because I was in a country that the pandemic was much more alive and well, much longer than the rest of the part of the world. So thank you for always making a space for me to come to your conference, because it was pretty phenomenal in San Diego. I really enjoyed it. I'm sorry I couldn't make it this year, but I enjoyed it a lot last year. So hope to come back again.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, it's been a pleasure to get to know you more, at those conferences. And one thing I've always been impressed with is, I mentioned earlier, your curiosity, your desire to learn. You just seem like you really, really are humble, and you have a desire to be, the best person you can be. And that includes, being the best orthodontist you can be. And I think that's really what we should all be aiming for.
I'd love to ask Corinne a question, which, based on our interview before, one thing really did stick out to me. Now, most of us remember the pandemic. Do you remember that, Brian? There was a pandemic a little while ago. I don't know.
That was rough.
I'm not sure if you believe in the pandemic. You watched some pretty weird news, but
that's not true.
But there was a pandemic. And
for the record, I read Real Clear Politics because it's balanced. Speaking of balance, Real Clear Politics, because it has both sides. Because I think the truth is generally found in the middle, and there's always truth to each side of every issue. There's always a view from a point that's still valid. It's just you're standing in a different place, right? So,
sure.
But yes, there was a pandemic. And
there was, yeah. I mean, I get my news exclusively through the Babylon Bee and InfoWars, so I might be a little bit off on this, but
sounds about right. No,
Corinne,
right, yeah.
you were stationed overseas during COVID in some of the areas that were hit the hardest. I mean, we like to complain over here. I know I sure do. It's one of my favorite pastimes, but about what we went through and all of that. But you really were at, if not ground zero, pretty close to it. So 2019, when the pandemic hit, where were you exactly during that time?
So I was stationed in Sicily, and I was in Catania, Sicily. So if it's the island off the boot. And not that I'm trying to encourage Instagram followers, but I did a really great Instagram live, just speaking from the heart, in March of 2020.
What's your handle there, Corinne?
It's Dr. Corinne Devin, DrCorinnedevin. And the only reason I mention it is if you want to see my reaction of what it was like, it's there live. I recorded it for a couple friends, and one of my friends who helps me with social media posted it on my channel. But the best way I can describe it is, imagine you live in a place where you can hear children outside and you can hear church bells ringing, and that is soon replaced by utter, complete silence. Where every time I get in my car, I am pulled over by the polizia, or the Italian carabinieri, and I have to speak in Italian, which by no means am I bilingual in Italian, but I speak enough to get by, about why I'm driving and where I'm going, and not to get pulled over and go to a gym or jail, because it was like everyone just silenced the country.
Wow.
My view is very different. It was like a bomb went off, but I never heard the bomb. And I would remember walking to the grocery store because I just wanted to walk outside, and it would be a 2-hour line just to get inside. It was what's very hard was that people got paychecks and different things in the US, which is great. I'm glad people got money, but that's not the case in Italy. So we would buy food for people, and there's entire towns where the entire town is gone. Either the people passed away, or dead, dead or gone, or they moved. And so it was really, really hard to watch, because these people became my family. When I put on Commander overseas, these people are the ones who put my rank on my shoulder board. And fast forward to when I went to Japan, because I moved, several of my colleagues, I moved during the pandemic. I went out with my stuff for 6 months, and I got locked in a hotel room. I couldn't go outside. I got tested every other week. It was called centennial testing. And I got multiple vaccinations. And that was something that was, emergency use authorization in the military. But then it became to a point where if we didn't get it, we were asked to leave the military. And, Japan, it was very different because, again, another elderly population. It was hard for the Japanese culture to watch some of us Americans get the shot before they could get the vaccination, believe it or not.
Oh, that's interesting.
And they did not have the same division as I saw here in the US. Like again, this is a very group mentality society. Same thing with Italy, where they want to preserve their elderly. They want to preserve the health. And even if you think, hey, I'm healthy, I've got the antibodies, I'm fine. especially in Italian, you hug, you kiss people on the cheek, you can still give that to someone. So it was really, really hard. I don't know if how much the economy has recovered in Italy, but as a country that's very benefit on tourism, it was just very hard to stand there and watch by and see that happen. Japan was a little bit differently. Everything was locked down. A lot of businesses closed down. And unfortunately, as Americans, we stand out. And I would say the biggest thing I saw is that when people chose not to maybe follow the rules, it kind of backfired in that culture. And so I saw some things that I hope that I don't see again. And I treated a lot of people. So I had to wear an N95 mask. I had to limit what the patients I saw. And I was very grateful to come back to this because I was still wearing a mask when I left Japan in May 2023, just to put things in perspective for your audience. And the country did not open. Even in March of 23, when I had colleagues come over and visit me, you still had to have the multiple shots or the test to even come over. I think now it's a little bit more open, but just they were very cautious. They're very slow. And to them, getting vaccinations is a privilege. So it's completely different. So hopefully that gives a good perspective for you both.
Yeah, I mean, that was here. We were in Arizona, we were in Phoenix. This was one of from a lockdown perspective, probably one of the most lenient areas, maybe outside of Florida. I mean, there were moments where you could just turn off the news and you wouldn't even know there was a pandemic. Having said that, we would go down Scottsdale, Kierland Commons, where we used to hang out, and they had boarded up businesses. I think that was mostly to prevent against rioting, because there was a lot of that around that time too. We had restrictions, but we were in a very unique culture at that time. And in a lot of ways, it felt like the whole thing just sort of passed over us. We'd have people visit us. I had friends from Canada come down, and we went out and got dinner, and they were just amazed. And this was actually a couple of years into it. I think this was around 2022 at this point. And by then, in Arizona, we were completely done. It was just a news story at that point. But from Canada, he was like, wow, I can't believe, first of all, you can even go to dinner and no one's wearing a mask. And it was crazy there. So I thought that your perspective was very unique because we hear about this kind of stuff on the news, but to actually live through it. I mean, you were telling me they would actually physically stop you and look for your papers. And if you couldn't provide them, I mean, you go to jail? Is that literally what would happen?
You go to jail or pay a fine. So if they pulled me over, I would say, lavoro at ospedale in Sigonella, in Militare Marinas. So basically, I'm saying I work at a hospital on the military base, and they would actually follow me to base.
Wow.
And make sure that I did it because people weren't surviving. Sicily, if anyone's ever been to Italy that's listening to this podcast, you have to realize that once you go south of Rome, the economy changes drastically. It's definitely, northern Italy is definitely much more prosperous, much more affluent than when you go south of Rome. You definitely can see that dichotomy change quite a bit depending where you are. And Sicily is no different.
And you said as recently as 2023, you're still wearing a mask over in Japan.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Wow.
So how was that coming back to the United States? Was it a breath of fresh air? Did it make you more nervous? Was it like these guys aren't taking it seriously enough? What were your thoughts when you came back?
I got COVID for the first time, believe it or not, going to a family reunion in Maine in a place that's not even
Wait, are you
Google
sure you
Maps.
didn't bring COVID to the family reunion? Because that's also very possible.
You would think as many people that I treated that were tested positive, I could not believe it. We went to, it was a memorial service for a member of my family who had passed away earlier. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, we're going to this place on a beach. There's 50 of us. You can't even find it on a map in Maine. And I get back and my boss is like, I can't believe you got COVID. And then I was off for a week because again, I work at a hospital. And so it's just kind of funny to me because I didn't have any symptoms. I had nothing because I'd probably been exposed to it or all the shots. But no, I mean, in some ways it was a breath of fresh air. I was ready to go out to dinner. I was ready to not have to be stopped. I was, and I think that was a hard part on a lot of my service members that I worked with in the military is we learned a new sense of resiliency. Watching our friends on social media, it's one thing when the whole world is locked down. It's quite another when you see your friends doing things that you can't do. And it really tested us at a core and also as a leader in my clinic of how am I going to help my people still feel like they're living life when they feel like so much of it is being squashed.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it was really hard. I mean, One of my superpowers is I'm not afraid to talk to anyone. And I had no problem saying things to 3-star generals, saying, listen, you're killing my people. They need to go home and see their mother that passed away. They need to do these things. They will take all the tests. They will do all the things. But, these are the things we would never question on. Why are we questioning it now? So that was definitely an eye-opening experience for sure.
Gosh, that's fascinating. And one thing that is coming as like an epiphany to me is to hear these different experiences. I have in my mind what COVID was, and we tend to do this. We have in our minds what something is based on our experience and what we see and observe. But you realize, gosh, your experience was so much different than mine. Mine was like, well, COVID was kind of inconvenient, and and there were some parts that really sucked, and there was a lot of stuff that was just kind of tolerable, but it wasn't like bad, and it wasn't super stressful. And it just makes me appreciate that that's not the case for many people, and that for some people it was a way different experience than mine was. And so I have to be mindful of that, right? When thinking of COVID, right? And you can extrapolate that to any number of different things. But gosh, that just sounds like that would have been stressful, I imagine, in a lot of ways.
It was. And so my way of channeling it was working on projects that were life goals that I never felt I had time to do. And I just threw myself into it. And that's something that...
What were some of those?
Gosh, it's not going to sound humble if I say some of those right now, but...
Well, you don't have to say, but I mean, it's always interesting,
So I published a book, Commander to Crown. So I wrote a book, published a book. So that was very humbling.
Very
Definitely hire a master and you'll go faster. So I used a book editor, a book coach. And I delivered my first talk for the AO in 2022 at the midwinter session. So that was incredible to speak in front of all my colleagues. That was a dream. And that led to a TED Talk. So that was really, really cool things that I learned to elevate during is just public speaking skills, because I think as orthodontists, sometimes we could get tunnel vision, but I think we have such an array of skill and talents that we should be able to capitalize and give back. And these were 2 areas that I wanted to do it in. So it was a lot of fun.
Can I ask about that TED Talk? I know you mentioned that for our interview as well, but, tell me a little bit about this TED Talk. First of all, what was the topic?
The topic was motivational, but the core message of the TED Talk was when you seek the unattainable, you change the game. And what I wanted to do, and I did this at the AO, but I did obviously TED Talks. Mine was 11 minutes. So don't feel like you're going to watch 90 minutes of me hearing me talk. But I wanted to make the audience think of different ways in their life of where they could do this. And where TED Talks have changed in the direction is, maybe for me at least, I shared a story and then I discussed how you could do it. And then I gave something to the audience of how they could take it and apply it to themselves. And I think that's such a beautiful thing is, as speakers, we have to learn how to earn the audience's attention, but also to keep it. And what can we give the audience? Yeah. Because we are asking for the right to speak and also for them to listen. And so that was my gift. And it's been great. It's springboard into some really other cool areas of my life that I hope to do. I hope to do more speaking because I think we as orthodontists have such unique voices and unique areas that we can give to our profession outside of just our clinical work, other things to prevent burnout and motivate people and get the world to think about things a little differently than just about teeth.
I'm hearing you, Corinne, talk about your why. Your why to speak is to add value. I heard you say something like, we have these people here, kind enough to give us their attention, right? And so we need to give something back to them. We need to give back to them. So I think anytime you're approaching something from a standpoint of gratitude and wanting to add value and give, from a giving standpoint, I think generally you're going to be successful. You're going to, however you define success, but I think that's a really great approach, a really great attitude. And I've found that in life, when we approach things that way, there's a lot of purpose, there's a lot of meaning, and we generally are able to make a meaningful difference in people's lives. And so that's what it's all about in the end. So anyway, I just thought that was cool. It's a great approach to want to add value rather than it being about your ego, right? It's I guess what I thought is this: you can be most effective when you have something to say, but you don't need to say it for your own ego, right? You don't need to say it for your own ego, but now you can actually make a difference. Because you're satisfied in your ego, and now, hey, what can I give? I think it's a beautiful concept.
Yeah, thank you.
That reminds me of a saying that you can't. I'm going to butcher this, but never give unsolicited advice. Like if someone asks you for your mentorship, for your help, then you provide that, but never force it on someone because it's going to be completely ineffective. And I think, for quite frankly, it's ego based. It's like my need to be a mentor. I need to identify as a mentor. I need to identify as a guardian, someone who's helping others. But if that's not the help they want to receive, then it's not going to be effective. And you're really doing it for your own edification as opposed to actually being effective and improving someone's life.
Yeah. And what is someone ready for too, right?
Yeah.
Rather than just force feeding like what you think is important. Like, well, what are they ready for? And I just see how many times in my life where I haven't been ready for something, and whoever, whether it's God or whoever is trying to teach you this, wiser than I am, which is of course often a lot of people, but you realize that you just think, it's not ready yet. But then finally, one day it clicks if you continue with like a curiosity, like a beginner's mind. You're always wanting to learn and you're willing to be humble that, hey, I can screw up and learn from this. It's a good place to be.
Well, Brian, I want you to know that whenever you're ready, my advice will be here for you. And I'm happy to coach you and mentor you.
There's no shortage of your advice to me, most of which is garbage, by the way, Corinne.
You don't return most of my texts, but I'm learning to live with that. That's not my ego, by the way. I'm legitimately concerned for you, but anyway, we'll let that go. Well, we just have to broach the topic of personalities because that's like all I think about all day, every day. And Corinne, you mentioned that you're into the Myers-Briggs, and I tried to guess your personality. I was very, very close. Okay, so I thought you were an ESFJ, but you tell our audience, what were you exactly?
I'm an ESTJ, but actually I am split on thinking and feeling. So EST/FJ. So yes. But, and then what are you, Andy? I'm curious.
Well, real quick, just to describe to our viewers what that is. So ESTJ, that's the executive, correct? So if you follow MBTI at all, your icon is that little like librarian lady with the ruler who's just like very stern and, just commanding. So an ESTJ, it's funny. I have a lot of ESTJ friends, and I think it's because,
hold on, to clarify, we are talking about Myers-Briggs MBTI personality types. If anyone wants to look this up, if you want to find out more about your personality and the different parts of your personality, this is what we're talking about.
16personalities.com. That's 16personalities.com. No financial interest. It's a free test, 15 minutes to take. I highly recommend it. But, so this executive, some of the main characteristics there is, first of all, they're a natural leader. Okay. And they tend to lead with authority. They tend to take things quite literally. They're very zeroed in on their goals. They know exactly how to execute on something. They also tend to, that S, that stands for sensing. So that's in contrast to an intuitive who's more abstract and kind of, heads in the clouds a little bit. An S-type personality is going to be very concrete. They're going to be the ones who are reading the articles and then reciting them and using the data, using the research tradition, very much into that.
Me.
So it doesn't surprise me. Yeah. And then I wanted Corinne to guess what Brian's personality is. And, I said, Brian, he's just the absolute worst one. And there's 16 of them. He's number 16.
And he would say that mine's
just
the worst.
Absolute. I mean, like, he really should be embarrassed. But can you guess what his would be, Brian, Corinne? Because you're an
keep in mind, let me just say
I
this.
would say
Andy's, wait, hold on, before you go. Andy's is only one letter different than mine, and it's
but
worse
it's a
than
big
mine.
one.
It's the worst letter.
It's a really important letter.
The worst letter.
All right, go ahead and try to guess, Corinne,
so
from that.
I would say extrovert because you're not afraid to talk to anyone.
That's
Sensing
true.
for sure, based on what I know about you guys. So,
why would you call him a sensor?
Well, he seems to really he gives such great information and I love all the stuff he shares on the OrthoPearls page, all the diagrams, all the things. He definitely seems like he comes from a feeler type of thing, but then maybe it's perceptive and not judging. I don't. Am I off? Am I wrong?
Tell me. You're pretty close.
Pretty close.
Just so if I'm following this, you're saying ESFP, which is the performer.
Right.
Okay, so that's like the dancer. That's the one who's just like out there kind of, always crazy and just kind of fly by the seat of your pants. So you're actually very close. Do you want to tell her what you actually are, Brian?
I'm ENFP.
ENFP.
ENFP. The campaigner. The campaigner.
You're more abstract.
Is
okay, now it's coming together because of those diagrams. Oh.
But some of them are kind of close though. Like some of them are like 55, 45, kind of a thing.
Which one is close for you? I felt like you were like right there, ENFP. Like, which one is close?
No. As Corinne mentioned, the there have been times in my life when I've been much more data driven. Like when I was younger, I was very much into the science, the data. I was less abstract. I was more formulaic. I was more black and white thinking, right? And part of it's just, I think how I grew up. I was raised to think that, and there was so much good in it, but very, very formulaic in certain ways. You know, if you put this much in, you get this much out. You know, if you do this, you get that. And life had always kind of broken my way, so to speak, that I recognize now that, gosh, like in some ways, I mean, the justice system worked for me. And when it shouldn't have worked for me, I had the benefit of that. Like I had mercy, right? In some ways. And so like just
Were you in
recognizing.
trouble with the law? What are you talking about?
No, I'm just talking about like, no, not with the law. When I say the justice system, I mean, what I mean is I recognize like the privilege of me growing up the way that I did, right?
White.
Yeah. Well, and like upper middle class and what I'm saying is things kind of broke my way. Like if I did this, I did get that. And if I worked this hard, this outcome did happen. And so not until, you know, I actually failed in things that I become more abstract, because I used to be more data driven. I used to be more like, no, you do this and the numbers and the science and do. And then once I started realizing like, oh gosh, like sometimes life doesn't go the way you want it. And sometimes it's actually, I didn't do the thing that I, you know, should have done. Yeah. And I failed here. And that was like, it's like a humbling experience when you fail, you screw up, and you realize that you kind of have to see things in a more abstract way, because otherwise, well, what do I do now? You know, how do you make sense of that? So that kind of has flipped in my life a little bit over the last 10 years, probably.
It's interesting you say that, because I kind of relate to that too. And I think our personalities continue to form. I'm not basing this on any science, but I would imagine into our early 20s, you know, our personalities is still in flux. You know, for my personality, we mentioned I'm off by one letter with Brian and Corinne. I'd love for you to try to guess what that letter is. So we have extroversion and intuition. He's a feeler versus a thinker. And then the last one is judger versus perceiver. So again, extrovert versus introvert, intuitive versus sensing, thinker versus feeler, and then perceiver versus judger.
I think it's going to be true. Because based on what you say, and I'm going to say.
Well, I'll give you a little bit of a hint. We're off by one, and then there's one other that I'm like right on the border with. So you might be on the right track if you think it's two.
I'll just ask you one question.
Oh, God, here we go.
Does Andy seem to have any feeling at all? Or does he seem to be completely void of a heart? Is he kind of more like the tin guy? Is that the guy?
Well, that's why I was like, okay, it's going to be either ES or ENTP or ENTJ. Like those are kind of where I was like going with this.
So I'm ENTP, but I do test sometimes as ENTJ. So like an ENTP, basically the commonality between me and Brian is that, and actually Chris is also an ENFP. The difference between those two is like we've got that same sort of chaotic energy, you know, heads in the clouds, always thinking of things, and you know that kind of abstract reasoning. We're perceivers, so I describe it as open-minded. Some people might describe it as flighty or non-committal. The difference is that it comes down to our decision-making process, whereas I will make my decisions based on an internal logic. You know, so I'll think what makes the most sense to me, and it doesn't matter how I feel about it, because whatever makes the most sense is the correct answer. That's pretty much how I see it. I'm pretty strong into that that thinker. Whereas Brian, I mean, I think he just kind of does whatever the hell he wants. He's got like a cat upstairs in his brain, just knocking balls of string around and just like whatever. No, I'm just kidding. But Brian makes his decisions based on his values. You know, that's what it comes down to, is what's important to me, and that's where I make those decisions. Whereas I'll go, what do I believe is the correct outcome? Brian's what is most important to me. Would you say that's accurate, Brian?
I would say.
Think right now. What's important
to summarize?
To you?
Yes. Yeah. To summarize, yeah. I think in a short summary, yes. You know what I've found though is the older I'm getting, the more I'm balancing out on that. Like the more T I'm becoming, because I'm recognizing, gosh, like when I've been too F, it's F'd me. I mean, you know, like so I'm becoming more T, and I'm actually seeing you becoming more F, like with your daughter Chloe and stuff. And so I think in the end,
insult me.
No, it's true, man. So I think, you know, that's the great thing about life and experience is, and you mentioned, you know, personalities, that it is evolving to some degree. I'm still going to be an F. I'm still going to lead with that to a degree, but I'm recognizing where I was unhealthily an F, too much an F, because I do have a left brain and a right brain. And that's one of the things that was kind of hard for me growing up. Sometimes it was hard to reconcile that, is I have a very logical mind, and I was good at science and I was good at these technical things, but then I was also artistic. Like I loved, painting and sculpting and stuff. And it took me a while to kind of bridge those things, honestly. And sometimes it's frustrating, like painfully frustrating, because it's like my left brain could see something logically, where I could describe it and I could be like, okay, this is totally the logical thing. But God, but I don't feel that way. And I've learned to become, the older I'm getting, is like, well, no, I need to be more T, and that feels better,
Well, that's kind of the idea. We got into this with Grant Collins a few weeks ago, but that's kind of the idea behind these personality types to begin with, is that it's not who you are. It's the way that it's the construct you've created to interface with the world as
you've adapted.
Exactly. And I think part of the growth that we go through is peeling that back like an onion, recognizing that this is an adapted personality and it's not who I am. And to get to who you are, you have to control for those aspects that you learn about. Okay, I recognize that I go to overvalue my emotions in decision making, and I could have some personal growth if I could bring that towards the center and still honor my values, still honor my emotions, but also, temper them with a certain degree of logic. Or, you could just be like me, which is like, well, logic is all that matters, and F your feelings. But what do you think about that, Corinne? How has MBTI affected your self-perception, your personal growth, if it has?
For me, it's really changed the way I lead. Very often as leaders, we expect people to do things the way we want to do them, when really I have to change the way I lead to get my message across. And I'll give you an example.
Yes.
When I was in Italy, it was the first time I became a department head. I was a commander, and I was in charge of 2 people that were 20 and 30 years older than me. And can you imagine the way you would speak to someone like that as a colleague? And then I also had another person that was my boss. And so learning, the most valuable lesson I learned is like, it doesn't matter. I have to put my ego aside and think there's only one way to do it. And really, if I change the way I lead, the mission gets accomplished, the things get done. I'm able to relate to them. And if I even found that I was even struggling with it or I couldn't connect, I would seek out other officers or other people who I know who could get through. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if it went my way or their way, another way. We're still getting things done. We're still getting the message across. We're still getting resolution. And that kind of it really taught me a lot of things of taking a step back and realizing that even parts of my personality can be a little too much. And just, pausing and taking and thinking about things differently. And I think that's really where it got me on my very self-awareness, introspective journey. And it's something that I usually lead with, because I think when you can stay open, and as a leader, when you can keep people open versus on the defense, really great things are how and what questions, not why questions, how and what questions, that you're able to be more effective and a better negotiator. Which are all important things to do as a leader.
Well, and I think that's interesting because, I know a lot of ESTJ friends, I mentioned that before. They can be kind of rigid. They have their mind made up, and they're convinced they're correct, even when they're not sometimes. And, they usually are, but not all the time. And it's really tough to get an ESTJ down off of that horse, I'll call it, but which is also interesting where that kind of vibes with my personality type. So ENTP, this is the devil's advocate, the debater. So yeah, I know, right? And it's funny because my dad is an ESTJ, my brother's an ESTJ, some of my best friends out here are ESTJ, and we're good for each other in a sense because they keep me organized and they keep me on task. And, they inspire me to be a little bit more disciplined and not just go completely into the chaos that Brian understands all too well. But on the other hand, I challenge them to be a little bit more open-minded and say, well, why do you believe that? So Corinne, you're saying how and what. The ENTP, if we had a question, it would be why. So I'm not just going to take what you say at face value. Why do you believe that? Why are you going in that direction? And if you can't give me a good answer, I'm not following you. It doesn't make sense to me. Again, here's the makes sense. Like what makes sense, I'm gonna do that. Or the more pertinent observation here, I think, would be about chemistry. You mentioned leadership styles. I've learned whereas an ESTJ is going to be sort of a commanding leader, an authoritative leader. Here's the way it is, and let's all do it, and inspire to get going forward. An ENTP and probably an ENFP as well, we're more of a democratic leader. So, well, what do you think about that? Why don't I help you solve the problem so that you have buy-in? And I think a little bit of that comes from me, because you can't get me to move unless I'm bought in. And I think that I project that onto other people to some degree. And some people respond very well to that. A lot of people want their opinions taken into consideration. They want to come to that conclusion on their own, but it doesn't work for everyone. And I have had employees where they just want to be spoon-fed the answer. And it's like, well, just what is it? And I'm like, well, I can't really tell you that, because if I tell you what it is and you take my word for it, you're not really going to take ownership over that. And I don't think that you're going to live up to your fullest potential. I think that this comes down to that chemistry. I think that it can be used as a tool to surround yourself by the right people. And that also includes those who are going to challenge you. And like Brian was saying, he recognizes sometimes he can be a little too much of a feeler and it interferes with his personal growth. It would be good for him to have a good old ENTP there to whack him back into shape when, I mean, of course I'm talking out the side of my mouth, but yeah. And in the same way, I will say, like, I will sometimes get frustrated or lose my temper or things like that. And it's nice to have guys like Chris and Brian who can be like, Andy, it's not that big of a deal. Like, just chill. It'll all be fine. It comes down to that chemistry. We were talking about that earlier in the podcast about how there's not a good or a bad. There's the extremes. And then there's really the chemistry between it all. In there is that balance, and it all works.
Well, I do appreciate listening to that. And I think for me, I would also challenge the group and people that are listening that leadership is an evolution. It's not something that we can just learn once in school or day by day. It's something that we evolve with time, we grow with time, and we pick up things that we learn from other leaders. And I would tell you, in the military, I've learned more from bad leadership than I have from good leadership. And, bringing those lessons and having those mentors, we call them sea daddies in the military, people that you can look up to and ask, hey, when you're not sure what to do, how to look at things differently, how to approach things differently, and who to go for help. And one thing that I've leaned into as an ESTJ is being confidently vulnerable with my team, sharing things with them where I am struggling, where I'm not sure what to do. And I would love their input and be more of a guider as a leader than it has to be this way. Or saying, hey, these are the parameters that I'm working in, but I would love your ideas and how we can work within these parameters. What does that look like?
Try to lead by consensus. Yeah. That's a great leader. I think that's a great way to lead. And, just to add my thoughts to the whole thing is, for me, it's a reminder that everybody's needed. Everybody plays a role, even our adversaries. There's a quote by Winston Churchill that says, so you have some enemies? Good. That means you've stood up for something sometime in your life. And I appreciate that more and more, that it's important to have a position. It's important to have a viewpoint. It's important to have a perspective and to acknowledge that there are flaws with that. And speaking of, these personality traits, the more I look honestly at aspects of my personality, how I've adapted over time, the more I can see, what served me when I was growing up, it doesn't serve me well anymore. What was functional and is now dysfunctional? Well, I should start doing the opposite thing, because Einstein says the definition of crazy is doing the same thing, expecting different results.
Actually,
so
I think that was George Costanza who said you should do the opposite.
Great episode, by the way. Great episode. And it's brilliant. But I think that's so true. But yeah, everybody's needed and everybody has a role, even the people we don't like. Yeah. And the people that frustrate us and challenge us. They are, in some ways, our greatest teachers. Like Corinne said, she learned the most from poor leadership. I would say in my life, I've learned the most from failures, not achieving my goals, me screwing up, so it's the paradox of life that makes it, worth living, really.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. This has been an awesome conversation. I appreciate all of you guys making time for this. Corinne, what we like to do on the podcast is finish up with 3 pearls, okay? These pearls can be clinical. They can be life pearls. They can be, you have a TED Talk. I'm sure you have something from there. But what are the 3 pearls that you can offer for our audience that they could go out and use tomorrow to improve their lives?
The first pearl is when you are approaching a situation where maybe you're anxious, you're nervous, you're not sure what to expect. something to keep in mind is, what if it's better than you imagine?
Interesting. I like
Because
that.
moving around a lot, handling different situations, one of my friends shared that with me. And I was like, you know what? You're right. Because if you kind of go with that mindset, I think that's really going to help you out. The next pearl that I would tell people is ask for help and keep asking for help until you get it. So often in life, we all struggle. We all struggle with something, whether it's learning how to write a book, which for me was a labor of love. Maybe it's finding someone in your staff that doesn't have quite the right skills or isn't picking up on things. And maybe you need to ask a colleague, ask for help, and keep asking for help until you get it. So that's my second pearl. My third pearl that I would say is, I'm going to probably bring it back to the military here. So I hope you guys don't mind. But after serving with the Marines, because the Marines are Department of the Navy, is Semper Fi, which means always faithful. And I think you should be always faithful in your life, whether it's to your family, your friends, our profession, the things that matter to you most. Just always be faithful. And with that, you can never go wrong.
I love it. Well, that's
advice.
great advice there, Corinne. We really appreciate you coming out here. Thanks for making the time. But great conversation, guys. Thank you so much for the time.
It's a fun convo.
Fun
See you
convo.
guys.
Yeah,
Bye.
for sure. Bye.
If you're an orthodontist that wants to connect with over 500 colleagues, hear over 30 of the best speakers in orthodontics, and see 50 of the most cutting-edge exhibits, have a chance to win some of over $70,000 worth of prizes, including a trip to Kauai, and enjoy the absolute best parties in orthodontics, you won't want to miss the 7th annual MOPC, the Mother of Pearls Conference, coming this October 9th through 11th. We're going big for our 7th year by renting out the Astronaut Memorial Foundation at the Kennedy Space Center in Cape Canaveral, Florida. This is the hub for NASA, where they train more astronauts than anywhere else in the world, and SpaceX launches occur all the time. We toured the campus, and let me tell you, it's like the Disney World of space, with theme park attractions, actual space shuttles, interactive exhibits, and real astronauts. On top of the best speakers, we'll be having our world-famous Friday Night Pearls party under the Saturn Apollo 5 rocket, with dinner, drinks, space-themed activities, and live music from the world's only all-orthodontist band, Relapse. Early bird prices are about to go up for every 100 tickets sold and have already gone up twice. Be sure to register today with your team at orthodonticpearls.org to get the best price for the best conference in orthodontics. Plus, we are the only conference with worry-free registration. If anything comes up and you can't make it for any reason, you can transfer your registration to next year's conference absolutely free. It's a no-brainer. So be sure to lock in your best price by registering you and your team for the best conference in orthodontics, the Mother of Pearls Conference, at orthodonticpearls.org today.